This is the bones today, the foundation, the structure that supports everything else. We're going to be looking at what Jesus believed. Before what he did, what he believed, what Abraham believed, what Noah believed, what David believed. What was their faith? And we're going to look at that as a start of a series, which is living in the in-between. So I want to say what I mean by that. So we live in the time between Christ's resurrection and the coming kingdom. That's the age we're in right now. That's the age we're living in. This will be a study on living in between promise and fulfillment. And the Bible calls it it gives a name for it, the age of hope. We have hope now. That was the good news. The good news that Christ proclaimed was that hope had arrived, that we were in this age now. So God has fulfilled the promise of the Savior, but the kingdom hasn't come yet. And it's a difficult age to live in. It's a blessed age because we have Christ's resurrection. We have the Spirit of God that we receive at baptism. So it's a blessed age, but it's a difficult age because obviously it's not the kingdom. And we have that to look forward to. And up here, I have a pot of soil. And so today, we're going to think of this as a pot that has, some of you know I've tried to grow chestnut trees from seed. And so we're going to picture this as a pot with a chestnut seed in it. And we'll refer back to it a few times. But that's what we got there. We got a pot with a chestnut seed in it. I'm going to read a text here from Romans, but before, at the risk of sounding too much like a tour guide, I want to give you all a little bit of an idea of what we're going to do in this next month and really for this year. And so the plan is to cover everything that we would want to cover in Christian life throughout this year. And to have it sort of in seasons or in movements. And so right now we would be in the season of trusting in God because that's the foundation. That was Jesus' foundation. That was Abraham's foundation. That was Noah's foundation, was a trust in God. That comes before anything else. And then we're going to look at, Jesus has been born now. We just celebrated that. And we're going to look at his life starting in February up through Easter, because that's when Christ was living. We're going to look at his example, Christ's example. And then throughout the summer, we're going to look at how to apply that to our lives. Call that a season of service or season of love. What that looks like in our lives throughout the summer. And then in the fall, we're back to a look at the coming kingdom, the hope, the resurrection, faithfulness and hope as we get into fall. And then we'll prepare for Christmas. So we've got a plan for this year, but right now we're in the season of trusting in God. And so today's message is going to be about that. I'm going to read you a text first from Romans 8:24 through 25. This is kind of the main message for today. For in hope we have been saved. But hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance we wait eagerly for it. I want to go back to 24, and then we're going to jump back to 25. In hope we have been saved. That's the foundation. It's a belief that changes. But we wait for that hope. Just like this seed in the pot. So let's look at 25. With perseverance, we wait eagerly for it. We're going to look at some examples of that today. Some examples of Christ's relation to that. And we're going to see what we can learn about this topic. Because that's the age we're living in. We're living in the age of hope. And this hope saves. This hope changes. And it's not about just trying harder or just being better. You focus on that hope, it changes. It takes care of it. This seed, we don't see anything happening. We're waiting. But what's happening? What happens to that seed when it's under the soil? And we don't see any of it. And it's that roots that's growing first. And this hope is that roots. This faith is that roots. This trust is that roots. That's the age we're in right now. And so we're going to focus on what's happening under the soil here today. And then when it grows, that's the kingdom. That's the resurrection. That's what it grows into eventually. But right now, we're focusing on those roots that happen first, that you don't see. And that's the hope. And it's not just optimism. And it's not just like a phrase like, don't worry so much about it. Or, it's going to be fine. Like just sort of dismissing the concerns we have right now. We're going to see examples. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus didn't say, don't worry about it, It's, no big deal. Just kind of dismissive of our concerns, of our pain, of our struggles that each of us have. He didn't just dismiss it, and he wasn't just generally optimistic. I'm sure it's going to be fine. Those things were all true. That pain was true for Jesus. That struggle was true for Jesus. That was true, and he had the faith. He had the hope. He had the trust. Both of those things. So we're going to look at some of those examples today. But first, I'm going to talk about what's happening in the soil now. So waiting in hope, persevering and anxiously awaiting in hope shapes who we become. That's the work before the fruit. That's what we're doing right now. We're in that time between promise and fulfillment. It's not inactivity. We're not just waiting. It says eagerly awaiting with perseverance, right? Well, what does that mean? I'm going to go to a book that we don't usually go to, or I don't frequently. Habakkuk 2, 3, and 4. And this one's interesting because I had to look at the context of this. So this was a prophet, and this was in a very difficult time. And Habakkuk believed that the nation would be restored, but it wasn't at the time. It was very hard times. He was discouraged and he was impatient. And first, Habakkuk was impatient, frustrated with God that things weren't happening at the time, at Habakkuk's timeline. Habakkuk was living in a time between promise and fulfillment, just like we are now. The nation was dispersed. It was a very bad time for the people of God. And Habakkuk first wanted his timeline. And then through prayer and through understanding, learned to trust God's timeline. And he's talking about it here. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. That's that fulfillment of the nation being restored. He wanted it to happen now. And he wanted all these problems to go away now. Just like we have today. He says, for the vision is yet for the appointed time, God's time. It hastens towards the goal, and it will not fail. There's the faith. Though it tarries, which is waits, it waits, so wait for it. For it will certainly come, it will not delay. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by his faith. So that contrast there. calls it proud, calls it, I want what I want. I want it to make sense how it should make sense to me. And he contrasts that the righteous will live by his faith. That it happens at God's time. And that's the struggle of living in between promise and fulfillment, that we all struggle with. And Habakkuk went through this process, and Habakkuk came to this realization, so I wanted to share it with you all today as a starting point. That while we wait, faith and trust is built, is developed, is practiced. And in the New Testament, in Luke 2:49, I want to point out, this is before Jesus' ministry. Luke 2:49, before Jesus' ministry. Before he taught anything, before he healed anybody, before he performed showed us the kingdom through his healings. Before he did any of that, before the Sermon on the Mount, before he proclaimed his purpose was to proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God. Before any of that, what's he do first? He goes to God in the temple. He said to them, "Why is it that you're looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my Father's house?" That came first. This was Jesus' faith. This was Jesus' example of what comes first. And that was trusting in God, connection with God. So that's our foundation. That's our bones. That's what supports everything else. And that's what we're going to build on throughout the year. But this is at the base. This is at the foundation. And it was for Jesus. What he did first, he went to God, learn about God, worship God before his ministry. So there's things in your life right now that, like you're waiting on the kingdom. We're all waiting for the kingdom, right? And we know it's reality from dust to dust, right? And we'll be planted just like a seed in the ground, most likely, and we'll be reborn in the kingdom. But think in your life right now, what is this period of waiting, this period of eagerly awaiting? What's it developing in you right now? What's growing under the surface with you that God's working with you on? And I want to bring that up to remind you today, it's a time to be thankful for that, to be aware of that, to pray for God's guidance with that, because God's working with you. God's working with you right now on something. So let's take a moment to recognize and celebrate that today. The second example I want to give you is that God acted first. This is why I say we live in such a blessed time, because we live in the time after Jesus' resurrection. We already know death has been overcome. We live in a wonderful time. God has already acted first. God has already loved first as an example for us. God has already forgiven first as an example for us. God took the first steps for us. And so it's a wonderful time to live in. It's easy to take it for granted, but we live in a blessed time. This age, the age of grace, the age of love. And God acted first. So I want to highlight some of those and recognize some of those today. And I want to point out, too, that remember in the Old Testament stories, they all had that hinge moment. With Jonah going down, moving away from God, and then that hinge moment when he's released by the whale. The ark coming up and floating, and then God remembers his covenant, and the waters recede. Israel going into slavery, and then God remembering his covenant. And then the story changes. And that's what we're living on the backside of that hinge moment. And that hinge moment was Jesus, what we just celebrated, Jesus being born on this earth to live as an example for us, and then being resurrected as another example of what's for us in the future. So I just want to celebrate that today. God loved first. So this is from Galatians 4:4. I want to celebrate this example of God loving first. When the fullness of the time came, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law. That was remember the old law? That's the hinge moment. Jesus was born under the law, and now we're under what? Grace. 2 different ages. And that's the age we live in right now, which has its wonderful blessings. So I don't just want to disparage this time we're living in by saying it's between promise and fulfillment. God's already taken this action for us first. So I want to celebrate this time. And I want to point out, Jesus living still struggled like we struggle. And I want to use his example in this age. In John 13:3, this was on the night of his betrayal. When he knew he'd be betrayed, he knew he would die the most disgraceful death that they had at the time. And he'd be betrayed by one of his own followers. The darkest time. Think about our struggles. Really. Think about our struggles. And they're real, and they're many. This is his moment. This is the moment he was in. He knew he was going to be betrayed. He knew he was going to be basically the biggest embarrassment they had, the biggest disrespect they had at the time was a crucifixion. That was, if I remember this right, Romans couldn't be crucified. This was something reserved for the worst. It was the most disrespectful way they could kill somebody, was crucifixion. This was his moment. This is right now. This is that night. And did he just say, oh, don't worry about it, or brush it off, or just minimize it, or dismiss it, or anything like? No, he looked it right in the face, and he was scared. You can see it. He didn't want it. He did not want this to happen. Things were happening to him that he did not want to happen. We can know that's true, just like we'll have in our lives. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God. At that time, at the night of his betrayal, he remembered that faith in God, that hope in God. And for Jesus, it was a sonship that he said we now have, an identity. When Jesus had his most difficult time, he remembered his identity. His identity was with God. Well, when we're baptized, we're now brothers and sisters with Christ. That's our identity. So in your hardest times, remember your identity. And to tie back to here, it's about what soil are you planted in. It's not about seeing all the growth, right? When that seed's in the ground, we have faith. We know what's going to happen. And if we go against that natural process, or we try to shortcut it, it usually does more damage than it does good, than to just trust the process and support the nature of what's happening. To understand it, to learn about it. If we want to help seeds grow better, what do? We study about how they grow. Well, that's what this is. If you want to have it happen better, you study it in the Bible. Don't try to shortcut it. Don't try to make it happen at your time. If I want that thing to grow, and I've tried to do it, I want it to grow so fast because you know how long it takes for a tree to grow and produce fruit. You just want it to happen fast. You learn about the natural process, and you trust the process. You trust, you have faith in nature, in our Creator. And that's what Jesus did in his most difficult time, is he remembered who he was. He remembered what soil he was planted in. And we're brothers and sisters with Christ now. We have the same faith, the same hope that he had here. He was resurrected. and so will we. And so at your most difficult times, at our most difficult times, remember the soil you're planted in. Remember the identity you have, your brother and sister with Christ. And just as Jesus was resurrected, you'll be resurrected too. So fall back on that at the hardest times. So think about that first thing you were thinking of, the thing that God was working with you on while you wait. Think about how you can incorporate some of this faith into that struggle, some of this faith into that reality that you're experiencing. Not to dismiss it, not to blow it off, or not to just be optimistic, but to introduce this type of faith, to understand the foundation is to trust God and to trust His plan, and to know what soil you're in and what comes from that soil, the resurrection to eternal life. And I want to talk a little bit about this waiting and perseverance. Eagerly awaiting and perseverance. And how this creates trust in God. How this practices trust in God. How we become what we're going to become while we wait in perseverance. It's not passive. We're not just waiting around. Trust is something that shapes, that we practice. In Luke 22:42, I want to see this in practice with Jesus. We just looked at His foundation, His identity that Jesus fell back on during His most difficult time. I want to look at Jesus saying plainly, He doesn't want this to happen. If there's any way possible for it to be taken away, unless it's the will of God. And that trust. So when Jesus got squeezed, when He was at His most difficult time, He remembered who He was, what soil He was planted in, and He recognized, if it be God's will, then let it be done. He said, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. That's our reminder with the thing that we're struggling with. So it's not just try harder. It's not just be better as we go into this new year. So often we go into the new year, we got these resolutions, right? But is there a part of the foundation that can change? Is there a part of trusting in God that can change? To where it's not just do the same thing, but just try to do it harder or better. Incorporate some trusting in God in there. Some faith in the process. Realizing the time we live in. We sang the song, Spirit is willing, but my flesh is weak. That we're practicing trust. We're developing trust. That's what's going on under the soil. That's the time that we're in. Jesus had honest fear, but He had faithful. And it began and ended with God. He started at the temple worshiping God, and right before His betrayal, He recognized God's will be done. But He had honest fear just like you do. He had honest anxiety about it just like you do. But God's will be done. In Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. What I want to highlight here is some trust before understanding. Here's the magic in what we're talking about today. I'm not trying to explain it so that it all makes sense and you can have complete understanding, and then we'll trust, and then we'll have hope, and then we'll have faith. Hope, faith, trust come before understanding. In Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Do any of us really know how that seed grows in that soil? all the mechanisms. We don't really understand all of it. There's no way. When you get even the most researched people, when they get down to it, they realize how much they don't know. That's what always happens, right? When you study something, you realize how much you don't know. They don't know. But we know it works. We know it happens. We know it trusts. And that Proverbs had learned that too, the writer here, and they're trying to share it with you. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. This is our reminders for living in this age. The beginning of what we're going to build on. Trust before explanation. Trust before understanding. Mary was told she was going to carry the Savior. They didn't know where they were going to live. They didn't even know where he was going to be born. They didn't know it was going to be in a manger. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know Herod was going to have that decree. They didn't understand the whole process. But Mary said, "Your will be, if it be your will, I'm your servant." She had trust before understanding. So for us, that can be prayer in times of stress. They call it righteousness in the Old Testament. Really, it's justice. It's doing the right thing, even when it's not easy. No shortcuts. You can't shortcut that growth. You can't wait all year and then plant the seed and then push it to come to full growth in a week. It's going to take the time it's going to take. So trust in that. That's the way justice works. That's the way righteousness works. It's trusting. It could be the more difficult thing. It could be easy to take a shortcut. But justice, righteousness, trusting in that it's the right way to go. That prayer is the right way to go when you're struggling with what to do. And to have some faithfulness instead of control. When it's feeling out of control, when it's feeling like you don't understand, it can be easy to try to control, just to try to understand. This is a reminder to have faithfulness be a part of that process. That be a part of that growth that's happening with you under the soil. So where now may God be asking you to have some faithfulness with your struggles or some prayer with your challenges? This is that reminder to bring that as a part of it. And you don't have to do it alone. So God's acted. Jesus was born. Jesus was resurrected. God will act again, and we're living in that time in between. And again, don't measure it by the growth that you see. Realize that things take time. With the right God's way, some things take time. The first verse we read from Habakkuk, he wanted it to happen on his time. And eventually he learned it's going to happen on God's time. Jesus wanted that cup taken away, but he knew it'd be God's will that this should be done. So right now, this is our focus, trusting in God for the next few weeks. And then in February, we're going to get into studying Jesus' life and his example, because that's the time we're in. Between his birth and his resurrection is what, kind of in the Christian calendar, that's what we're going to be in as we lead up to celebrating his resurrection at Easter. But for January, we're going to stay on this topic. And we're going to get our foundation really solid as we go into this year. And we'll have some practical things to remind us to do when we're struggling, because we know we struggle. All these people in the Bible we read about, they all struggled. Jesus was struggling. He was struggling with temptation in the wilderness. Jesus was struggling on the day of his betrayal. He didn't want it to happen. So, we're going to look at this faith and trust in God for January. Let's have a closing song, and then we'll have a closing prayer before we dismiss.